I'm writing this from memory, some mine, but not all. The facts won't sync with the reality, but they'll be close. And there's no one to say otherwise, so for all intents and purposes, this will be the history of a settlement we called Palamon, and the horrors that followed an all too brief peace. I remember home, and stories of a paradise we'd all get to see someday, of a city shining even in the night. Palamon didn't shine, but it was sanctuary of a sort. We'd settled in the heart of a range that stretched to the horizon, wooded mountains that shot with purpose towards the sky. Winters were harsh, but the trees and peaks hid us from the world. We talked about moving on sometimes, striking out for the city. But it was just a longing. Drifters came and went. On occasion, they would stay, but rarely. We had no real government, but there was rule of law, basic tenets agreed upon by all and eventually overseen by Magistrate Loken. And there you have it. No government until there was. I was young, so I barely understood. I remember Loken as a hard-working man who had just become broken. Mostly, I think he was sad and frightened. As his fingers tightened on Palamon, people left. Those who stayed saw our days become gray. Loken's protection from the fallen, from ourselves, became dictatorial. Looking back, I think Loken had just lost too much of himself, his family. But everyone lost something, and some of us had nothing to begin with. My only memory of my parents is a haze, like a daydream, and a small light, like the spark of their souls. It's not anything I dwell on. They left me early, taken by dregs. Palamon raised me from there, the family I called my own, cared for me as if I was their natural-born son. And life was good. Being the only life I knew, my judgment is skewed, and it wasn't easy. Pocked by loss as it was, but I would call it good. Until, of course, it wasn't. Until two men entered my world. One, a light. The other, the darkest shadow I would ever know. The man I would come to know as Jaren Ward, my third father and quite possibly my closest friend, came to Palamon from the south. I was just a boy, but I'll never forget his silhouette on the empty trail as he made his slow walk into town. I'd never seen anything like him. Maybe none of us had. He'd said he was only passing through, and I believed him. Still do. But life can get in the way of intent, and often does. I can picture that day with near perfect clarity. Of all the details, though, every nuance, every moment, the memory that sticks in my mind is the iron on Jaren's hip. A cannon that looked both pristine and lived in, like a relic of every battle he'd ever fought, hung low at his waist. A trophy and a warning. This man was dangerous, but there was a light about him, a pureness to his weight, that seemed to hint that his ire was something earned, not carelessly given. I'd been the first to see him as he approached, but soon most of Palamon had turned out to greet him. My father held me back as everyone stood in silence. Jaren didn't make a sound behind his sleek racer's helmet. He looked just like the heroes in the stories, and to this day, I'm not sure one way or the other if the silence between the townspeople and the adventurer was born of fear or respect. I like to think the latter, but any truth I try to place on the moment would be of my own making. As we waited for Magistrate Loken to arrive and make an official greeting, my patience got the best of me. I shook free from my father's heavy hand and made the short sprint across the court, stopping a few paces from where this new curiosity stood, a man unlike any other. I stared up at him as he lowered his attention to me, his eyes hidden behind the thick tinted visor of his headgear. My sight quickly fell to his sidearm. I was transfixed by it. I imagined all the places that weapon had been, all the wonders it had seen, the horrors it had endured. My imagination darted from one heroic act to the next. I barely registered when he began to kneel, holding out the iron as if an offering, but my eyes locked onto the piece, mesmerized. I recall turning back to my father and seeing the looks on the faces of everyone I knew. There was worry there, my father slowly shaking his head as if pleading with me to ignore the gift. I turned back to the man I would come to know as Jaren Ward, the finest hunter this system may ever know, and one of the greatest guardians to ever defend the Traveler's Light. And I took the weapon in my hand, carefully, gently, not to use, but to observe, to imagine, to feel its weight and know its truth. That was the first time I held last word, but unfortunately, not the last. Loken's men found Jaren Ward in the courtyard where this had all began. 9 guns trained on him, 9 cold hearts awaiting the order. Magistrate Loken, standing behind them, looked pleased with himself. Jaren Ward stood in silence. His ghost peeked out over his shoulder. Loken took in the crowd before stepping forward, as if to claim the ground. His ground. "You question me?" There was venom in his words. "This is not your home." I remember Loken's gestures here, making a show of it all. Everyone else was still, quiet. I tugged at my father's sleeve, but he just tightened his grip on my shoulder to the point pain. His way of letting me know that this was not the time. I'd watched Jaren's every move over the past months, mapping his effortless gestures and slight, earned mannerisms. I'd never seen anything like him. He was something I couldn't comprehend, and yet I felt I understood all I needed the moment I'd seen him. He was more than us. Not better, not superior. Just more. I wanted Father to stop what was happening. Looking back now, I realized that he didn't want to stop it. No one did. As Loken belittled Jaren Ward, taunted him, enumerated his crimes and sins, my eyes were stuck on Jaren's pistol, fixed to his hip, his steady hand resting calmly on his belt. I remembered the pistol's weight, effortless, and my concern faded. I understood. "This is our town, my town, Loken was shouting now. He was going to make a show of Jaren, teach the people of Palamon a lesson in obedience. Jaren spoke, clear, calm. Not anymore. Loken laughed dismissively. He had 9 guns on his side. Those gonna be your last words then, boy. The movement was a flash, quick as chain lightning. Jaren Ward spoke as he moved. Yours, not mine. Smoke trailed from Jaren's revolver. Loken hit the ground, a dark hole in his forehead, eyes staring into eternity. Jaren stared down the 9 guns trained on him. One by one, they lowered their aim, and the rest of my life began, where in a few short years, so many others would be ended. The noble man stood, and the people looked to him, for he was a beacon, hope-given form, yet still only a man. And within that truth, there was great promise. If one man could stand against the night, then so too could anyone, everyone. In his strong hand, the man held a rose, and his aura burned bright. When the man journeyed on, the people remembered. In his wake, hope spread. But the man had a secret fear. His thoughts were dark. A sadness crept from the depths of his being. He had been a hero for so long, but pride had led him down sorrow's road. Slowly, the shadow's whisper became a voice, a dark call, offering glories enough to make even the brightest light wander. He knew he was fading, yet he still yearned. On his last day, he sat and watched the sun fall. His final thoughts, pure of mind, if not body, held to a fleeting hope. Though they would suffer for the man he would become, the people would remember him as he had been. And so the noble man hid himself beneath a darkness no flesh should touch, and gave up his mortal self to claim a new birthright. Whether this was by choice or destiny is a truth only known to fate. In that cool evening air, as dusk was devoured by night, the noble man ceased to exist. In his place, another stood. Same meat, same bone, but so very different. The first and only of his family, the sole forebearer and last descendant of the name Yor. In his first moments as a new being, he looked down at his rose and realized for the first time that it held no petals, only the jagged purpose of angry thorns.